Hi. You don't need 12 rules for life. You don't need to get your house in perfect order. You don't need Jordan Peterson. Just to start off, this video will not be a point-by-point refutation of Peterson. Cass Arris has already done something like that on her channel in a whole series of videos. And actually, if you're really interested in hearing criticism of Jordan Peterson, there are plenty of articles, videos you can take a look at. Plenty. A few of them are in the description. I'm here to make a broader point about the idea of letting people like Jordan Peterson give you advice. I'm Chris, and this is what had to be said. You want some advice? Beware of advice. Call this video advice if you like, but who says I'm right? Who says what I think can be applied to your life? Who says you can't figure out all these things for yourself? And better. I've learned all kinds of stuff in my life through reading and experiences and distilled it into how I want to live. That doesn't mean I know anything about you and your situation. You should only follow my rules if you want to be like me. Or maybe more accurately, if you want to be like I think you should be. Because of course people don't always follow what they say are their rules. So what do you think? You want to be like me? You don't want to be like you? Don't you have your own values and dreams? People like Jordan Peterson get called geniuses for making trite statements based on things the culture claims to believe in already. Anyone can give out that kind of advice, just like anyone can write a horoscope saying, something important will happen to you over the next few days, but you might not realize it at the time. But maybe not everyone can make millions of dollars at it. The thing about advice is, whether free advice from a friend or book advice from a guy you're never going to meet, it costs nothing to be wrong. We tend to dispense advice liberally without regard to the consequences because, as far as we're concerned, there are no consequences. It's you who's supposed to follow my advice, not me. But us people, we're ignorant, okay? We think we understand things, so we let fly with some advice when we're not qualified to make it. We accept other people's advice because they seem to know what they're talking about. See the cycle? I give you my worthless advice, you accept it and tell it to someone else. Because even though we phrase it as a suggestion, you can accept it or not, I won't be offended, we still hear it and it still influences our thinking. Books full of general advice aren't really different from free advice that way. Not all advice is useful. Some is harmful. I'm pretty sure what Peterson's trying to accomplish with these rules is to give your life the structure he thinks it should have. My problem is he doesn't know what structure your life should have. 12 rules that everyone should follow sounds more like an antidote to individuality to me. I don't want to talk about many of the rules individually, but I've got to bring up Rule 8 because it's just plain utopian. Tell the truth, or at least don't lie. Seriously? It's one of those rules that would just work out great if only 100% of people followed it. But if other people are lying, especially people in positions of power, it'd be absurd to ditch such a useful tool. How can you be so naive as to tell everyone not to lie? People will lie if it's in their interest. Humans start deceiving before they even learn how to talk. I don't like lying, but if I'm late to work, I'll almost definitely blame traffic or something because as the people who dictate my schedule, my bosses can punish me for violating it. The people, then maybe if I was harboring a fugitive, of course I'm going to lie to protect them. The forces who are coming to look for my fugitive have built an entire system on lies, so why wouldn't I lie to protect someone from that system? If you mean don't lie too much because people will realize it and regard you as untrustworthy, okay, sure. But first, that's not what the rule states. And second, that's something most of us learn from the boy who cried wolf when we're 5. But even that story doesn't pretend you should never ever lie. It just says don't build up a reputation for it. Instead of never lying, here's a rule you could try. Do what you think is right in the circumstances. I know, so profound, right? And I bet you can follow that one. But the rule I find particularly objectionable is number 6. Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. Sounds good on the surface. I guess this is Peterson's way of telling you not to criticize the world ever. Because obviously you won't ever get your house in perfect order. It's impossible. You're the problem, he loves to say. It's easy to say. You're the problem, give me money. This is the right-wing mindset. Blame only the individual. As if individuals were automatons and culture, laws, the demands of the economy, and all the other systems in the world were just imaginary and had no effect on anything. I get that Peterson is trying to appeal to angry young men to consider they might be the problem, or at least part of it, and that's true, they might be. We need more self-awareness and humility, sure, but we live under systems that deserve a lot of criticism too. What Peterson seems to be saying in this chapter is don't let vengeance or nihilism or idealism turn you into a mass murderer, which is probably sound advice. But that's not how it comes across. It comes across as victim blaming. After all, most people won't remember all the details of the chapter, just the name of it, the words in the rule, which offer no ambiguity. Set your house in perfect order, or shut up. I've talked about the systems of violence and propaganda that we live under in lots of videos on this channel, so check them out if you're interested. But to make what, to me, feels an obvious observation, how could everything that happens to you be your fault when so many people are lying to you and taking from you? Parents structure your whole life and your way of thinking from a young age. School demands conformity of behavior and thought in most of your waking time. Same with work. The need for money structures your life from birth, as your parents are forced to get money, and when you're old enough, you're expected to make money or fall into poverty trying. The government takes your money through taxes, your freedom through laws, your mind through the fear it instills in you, and the propaganda it fills your ears with. Advertising molds your thinking to business ethos. Business privatizes the things you need. Your peers expect you to conform to the culture, and some of them actually think you should go to jail if you don't, etc., etc. What are the effects of these things? They're huge. They're everything. They're everything we know until we start thinking critically. Study, work, consume, procreate, die. Your whole life and everything you're supposed to think about it is planned out for you by other people. If you want to follow their plan for you, follow their rules. There are millions of external forces working on you, shaping how you think and what you do. The self-help industry trains you to ignore all of them. But until you learn how those forces work, you might not recognize them. And you might keep thinking only in individual terms. Sure, as individuals, we ultimately make the choices, and bearing that in mind can be empowering. But we were presented with a pretty limited and ever-shrinking range of options, and we adjust to those limits, however artificial and unnecessary. For instance, if you're like most people, you've been told your whole life you need to prepare for a career. You'll have been told you can do anything you want, but you were still expected to choose one thing, to guess about how much you would like to do it professionally and work towards that. You've probably had various interests and aspirations, but your parents nudged you away from some and towards others. Sure, you can play ball or play music, but not as a career. So you gave up that dream. Then you wanted to do something else, but as you got older, you realized it didn't make as much money as this other career. And you need money, and you need as much money as you can get. So you work toward the career you don't like so much, but which pays better. You need to justify all this to yourself, so you say, well, that old dream was silly. It doesn't matter what I do. Lots of people don't like their jobs. That's life. You tell yourself you made the right decisions to the point you start telling other people they shouldn't complain about their jobs either. And they shouldn't blame the system. Just learn new skills and get a different job. You might even refuse to sympathize with people, because even if they live in the streets or got addicted to heroin or got depression or something, well, that must be their fault too. Then you have kids and raise them to shut up and accept things just like you learned to do. Am I close? It's pretty normal. That's what the system wants us to do. That's how it reproduces itself, the language of the ruling class coming out of the mouths of parents and teachers. But this centering of blame on the individual leaves out so much. So you're poor, must be your fault. There are all kinds of unexamined assumptions behind this thinking, like how the dominant social institutions work and how fair they are, the amount of opportunity available and that it's available to everyone, and so on. Getting your house in order might mean solving bigger social problems. But if you stop at the individual, you don't think about the bigger picture, and the world is simple. You don't have to think about social problems anymore. They're not our responsibility, they're their own responsibility. But you don't know their stories. You just know they're poor. That's not a reason to stop caring and put it out of your mind by repeating the propaganda these rich people put out. See, these right-wingers, and yes, Jordan Peterson is right-wing, just in case you didn't know, claim to be the defenders of the individual against a hive mind left. But really, they're just the defenders of the status quo. They might already have the skills to make a systematic analysis of something. Like if you understand how a car works or a business, you can understand something as a system. They might just not apply their systems thinking to things like politics or the economy, the nature of the police, whatever. You can learn about their history, look at actions and their consequences, consider the problem from various angles, and ask why a lot. If you don't do that, why would you even have an opinion on the topic? This right-wing approach reduces all causes to the imaginary, autonomous individual who makes all their own choices independently. And by defending this theoretical person, they say they're defending the idea of the individual and this thing they call personal responsibility. But actually, they don't respect the individual because they're not interested in you as an individual, just you as a category. It's easy to take a few cases from your limited experience and infer that poor people or whatever group of people are that way for their own fault. That's stereotyping. It's lazy thinking. You don't want to have to think in nuances, so you just wrap the whole problem in a propaganda phrase like, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. You see this lazy thinking when someone brings up systemic racism, and Ben Shapiro bends over backwards to find a way to blame the victims and deny racism is a problem. It's their culture, he says. It's black on black crime, the right says. That's all they can think of to say. But that's all they need to say. It dismisses systemic arguments, or it attempts to make one just about culture, as if you could separate culture from history and the state. You see more of this lazy thinking when they tell people to get jobs, even though the person might have two jobs and still can't make ends meet. You see it when they blame people for their drug addictions, because they don't know why people get addicted to drugs. And in any case, many of them are hypocrites, except to them, prescription drugs that you get addicted to don't count as drugs. It's easy to say it's a choice, just like committing a crime. Everyone in jail deserves it. Everyone who gets addicted made the choice. But it takes getting to know the individual to know what set this train in motion and why it crashed. They weren't living fulfilling lives surrounded by family and friends in a supportive community. You can be sure of that. So what happened to them? Until you know that, you have no business telling them it's all their fault. Besides, if you don't understand the nature of the existing system, you won't understand the huge role it likely played. At one point in this chapter, Peterson writes, "Don't blame capitalism, the radical left, or the iniquity of your enemies." Why? I mean, I don't know how the radical left could be your biggest problem, but don't blame capitalism? The ideology that dominates the world? It bears no responsibility for anyone's problems? Have you ever looked into how capitalism causes violence, poverty, addiction, and mental illness? If not, how can you understand any of those things? I would go so far as to say individuals shouldn't be put on trial without looking deep into the role external factors played in shaping their lives. At least then we'd be searching for causes for once. But the system is designed to punish the individual and reject arguments based on systems, which would be like pulling back the curtain. And I'm not saying because you were poor or abused or something, you bear no blame for your actions. Nobody thinks that. It's good to consider how you might be to blame for things. I'm saying placing all the blame on the individual perpetrator is simplistic. There are more layers to our actions, many causes that go unexamined. Keeping the spotlight on the individual means taking it off the system. A purely individual approach to causes keeps the social structure intact. It assumes the system is fair and legitimate and doesn't need changing for us to realize our potential. But telling people to change and then maybe the world will change has it backwards. Again, these systems have a huge impact on who we are and what we do. So change the social institutions first, and people will necessarily change with them. I'm not saying you should try to change people. I'm saying we should be changing systems. First, critically evaluating them, and then, if they're not beneficial to us, rejecting them. Structural change will result in personal change much more so than the other way around. We often don't stop to think about to what extent our lives are planned and how we design them to meet the demands of the systems we live under. While we still have to live under capitalism, we have to get money somehow, or else risk the horrible effects of poverty. While we live under the state, we still have to follow the law, or not get caught breaking it anyway, if we want to avoid getting kidnapped and locked up. And we still have to make money because we have to pay taxes, and we're not allowed to disengage from the system or the police will come and drag us back. And pretty much anywhere, we're not supposed to deviate too far from the culture either, whose demands can be just as restrictive as money in the law. So that's the bulk of our time, working for other people's benefit because the only other choices, the only other kind of life most of us can even imagine is just varying forms of suffering. Now, if I change myself, that's a good start. But what good will it do? Everyone else, including my children, will live under the same shitty system. They'll still get indoctrinated just like you and I were, and maybe they'll break out of it, and maybe not. And even if they do, what will be there for them? More of the same. But without having to feed these systems all day, we wouldn't be wasting so much of our time on meaningless duties. So we'd have more time for study or leisure or whatever we want. That's freedom. Now, if you're watching this and you're a fan of Jordan Peterson and you've made it this far, I might need to add that I don't think we should replace the existing system with a different system. I'm saying if we eliminate oppressive systems, we'd be free, and everyone's lives would be better. I'm not going to talk about how to do that in this video. The most important thing for now is for you to know it's possible and desirable. You can train yourself to evaluate everything you hear and everything you believe critically. I ask myself questions like, why do I think that? Where did my thinking come from? How might I be wrong? What do other people say about it? Do I have enough knowledge and perspective to think critically about this subject? You could learn logic and philosophy and apply them to your beliefs. And for everyone's sake, please don't assume your superficial understanding of something is in any way factual. Practically everyone I know says the way things are in their field is nothing like the world's perception of it. But they had to learn all about their fields to know that. So you want more of my advice? No? Listen to people, learn about systems, and don't make assumptions based on some stuff you heard. You could do that, right? By the way, if you're saying to yourself, so why should I listen to you or believe anything you say? Then good, you're starting to get it. Compare whatever I say with your experiences and anything you can Google. Let's talk about rules. You don't need 12 rules. How are you even supposed to remember 12 rules? No one follows 12 rules consistently unless they're forced to by a drill sergeant. And now the guy's coming out with 12 more rules? So that's 24 rules? Sounds more like a dictator than an advisor to me. But you don't need his advice. You don't need mine either. The thing about rules is they usually aren't rules. Here's what I mean. For example, the ruling class makes laws, but they don't follow their own laws, and they use the state to protect themselves and their agents, like the police. So cops and soldiers kill and get paid for it. Can you? But the law against murder is hardly a rule. It's a rule for you, sure, but not for everyone. And it's not that different for our personal rules. We might have some rules, but for the most part, what we call rules are suggestions or guidelines or ideals that we aspire to, rather than laws that we're bound to, so we can make exceptions. And that's probably for the best. It's tough to be consistent without just switching our brains off and letting the rules decide. Like that movie Click. And that's okay. Consistency is overrated. Rules are overrated. There are sayings and folk wisdom and other lessons that can be applied to most situations, but that doesn't mean those situations require rules. Like, I can't think how many times I've heard someone say, don't have sex on the first date. Why not? Well, they don't have any reasons for that. There might be reasons, like maybe research suggests it's going to jeopardize a relationship that otherwise might have had promise. I don't know. But then, so could not sleeping with them. Depends on them and you. Here's an alternative rule. If you want to have sex, if it's the right time and place for you and the people that you're with, don't let other people's rules stop you. It begs the question to say we need rules. Just like Peterson says we need structure, routine, and tradition, too. He doesn't explain why. Apparently, it's just obvious. But assuming you need rules, I think you can figure them out for yourself. Not only that, I think the process of arriving at your own conclusions is the most important part of making a rule. Even if I were the wisest person in the world, as if there were such a person, if I just handed you a set of rules and you followed them without thinking, you wouldn't know why you were following them. It's a great way to create zealots, not a great way to foster critical thinkers. But even if I present you with my rules and say, You might want to use them. Here are some reasons why. I'm still trying to influence your thinking on the matter. You've already got enough people trying to do that. Goals are pretty overrated too. They have some use, sure. Like, if you want to do muscle training, you can set yourself a weight and try to reach that goal. It's something to aim for. It can motivate you. But the number's arbitrary. You don't need to feel guilty for failing to achieve it, just like you shouldn't feel guilty for not following someone else's rules, or even your own. I don't think you need a set of goals or rules. It depends how important they are to you. Why make goals or rules for the sake of having goals and rules? My guess is all you'll get out of it is stress from trying to stick to all of them. You can't set your house in perfect order. We are not perfect people. It's fine to improve yourself, but let's not reject the option to organize with other imperfect people to change systems and change the culture and change the future. Change doesn't have to involve totalitarian methods and mass murder like Peterson seems to think. What you think matters. I suggest taking back your brain so you decide what to think. How you do that is up to you.